Now, it seems that in the 20s and 30s, a dude by the name of Damon Runyan's chief sports writer for a certain New York newspaper. He spends many years walking up and down Broadway, soaking up the atmosphere, and ends up writing many a great story set among the lowlife in New York. He writes about guys, dolls, dudes, moles, shysters, hustlers, crap shooters, speakeasies, and a certain sort of icing, which doesn't involve cakes. The tales take place at night or underground because, let's face it, New York takes place at night or underground. Tonight, you'll get to hear the story of a big fat gangster called Butsy Fagan and how he comes face to face with Johnny One Eye, a pussycat.
This cat I'm going to tell you about is a very small cat. In fact, it is really nothing but an infant cat. It is gray and white and very dirty, and its fur is all frowsled up. So it's a very miserable looking little kitten, to be sure. The day it crawls through a broken basement window into an old house at East 53rd Street, over near 3rd Avenue in the city of New York, and goes from room to room saying, meow, meow, in a low, weak voice, until it comes to a room at the head of the stairs on the 2nd story, where a guy by the name of Rudolph is sitting on the floor thinking of not much. One reason Rudolph is sitting on the floor is because there's nothing else to sit on, as this is an empty house that has been boarded up for years and there's no furniture whatever in it. And another reason is that Rudolph has a .38 slug in his side and really does not feel like doing much of anything but sitting. He has an automatic Betsy on the floor beside him, and naturally he is surprised quite some when the little kitten comes meowing into the room, and he picks up the Betsy and points it at the door in case anyone he does not wish to see is with the kitten. But when he observes that it is all alone, Rudolph puts the Betsy down again and speaks to the kitten as follows. "Hello, cat," he says. Of course, the kitten does not say anything in reply except, meow. But it walks right up to Rudolph and climbs on his lap. Although the chances are, if it knows who Rudolph is, it'll hightail it out of there quicker than anybody can say scat. There's enough daylight coming through the chinks in the boards over the windows for Rudolph to see that the kitten's right eye is in bad shape. And in fact, it is half bulged out of its head in a most distressing manner, and it's plain to be seen that the sight is gone from this eye. It is also plain to be seen that the injury happened recently. And Rudolph gazes at the kitten a while and starts to laugh and says like this, "Well, cat," he says, "you seem to be scuffed up almost as much as I am. We make a fine pair of invalids here together. What is your name, cat?" Naturally, the kitten does not state its name, but only goes, meow. And Rudolph says, all right, I will call you Johnny. Yes, he says, your tag now is Johnny One Eye. Well, I suppose you're saying to yourself, what is this Rudolph doing in an old empty house with a slug in his side? So I will explain that the district attorney is responsible for this situation. It seems that the DA appears before the grand jury and tells it that Rudolph is an extortion guy and a killer, and I do not know what all else. Though some of these statements are without a doubt a great injustice to Rudolph, as up to the time the DA makes them, Rudolph does not kill anybody of any consequence in years. God. It is true that at one period of his life, he's considered a little wild, but this is the 1920s when everybody else is too. And for 7 or 8 years, he is all settled down and is engaged in business organization work, which is very respectable work indeed. Then the DA starts poking his nose into his affairs, claiming that Rudolph has no right to be making money of the businesses, even though Rudolph gives these businesses plenty of first-class protection. In fact, the DA claims that Rudolph is nothing but a racket guy and a great knock to the community. And all this upsets Rudolph no little when it comes to his ears in a roundabout way. So he calls up his law books and requests legal advice on the subject. And law book says the best thing he can think of for Rudolph to do is to become as inconspicuous as possible right away, but to please not mention to anyone that he gives this advice. But as Rudolph is departing from the neighborhood, who bobs up but a young guy by the name of Butsy Fagan, who's said to be able to put a slug through a keyhole at 40 paces without touching the sides. Though I suppose it'll have to be a pretty good-sized keyhole. Anyway, he takes a long-distance crack at Rudolph as Rudolph is rounding a corner. But all Butsy can see of Rudolph at the moment is a little piece of his left side, and this is what Butsy hits. Although no one knows it at the time, except, of course, Rudolph, who just keeps on departing. Anyway, the cops go looking for Rudolph in Hot Springs and Miami and every other place except where he is, which is right in New York, wandering around the town with a slug in his side, knocking at the doors of old friends requesting assistance. What all the old friends do for him is to slam the door in his face and forget that they ever see him. He cannot even consult a doctor about the slug in his side, as he knows that nowadays the first thing a doctor will do about a guy with a gunshot wound is to report him to the cops. By now, the slug is commencing to cause him great pain. And naturally, the pain turns Rudolph's thoughts to the author of Say. He remembers that he once hears that somebody says that Butsy lives over on East 53rd Street. So, one night, Rudolph decides to look Butsy up and cause him a little pain in return. And he's moseying through 53rd when he gets so weak, he falls down on the sidewalk in front of the old house and rolls down a short flight of steps. And he rolls down a short flight of steps, and before he stops rolling, he brings up against the door itself, and it creaks open inward as he bumps it. After he lays there a while, Rudolph can see that the house is empty, and he crawls on inside. Then, when he feels stronger, Rudolph makes his way upstairs, because the basement is damp, and mice keep trotting back and forth over it. And eventually, he winds up in the room where Johnny One-Eye finds him the following afternoon. And the reason Rudolph settles down in this room is because it commands the stairs. Naturally, this is important to a guy in Rudolph's situation, though after he's sitting there for about 14 hours before Johnny comes along, well, he can see that it's not going to be much disturbed by traffic. Well, after a while, Johnny One-Eye wakes up and comes from under the coat and looks at Rudolph out of his good eye. And Rudolph takes a piece of paper out of his pocket and makes a little ball of it and rolls it along the floor. And Johnny bounces after it very lively indeed. Johnny, Rudolph says, I guess you must be suffering more than I am. I remember there are some pet shops over on Lexington Avenue, not far from here. And when it gets good and dark, I'm going to take you out and see if we can find a cat croaker to do something about your eye. Yes, Johnny, Rudolph says. I'll also get you something to eat. You must be starved. Johnny One Eye says meow to this and keeps on playing with the paper ball. But soon it comes on dark outside. So Rudolph puts his Betsy in a side pocket of his overcoat and picks up Johnny and goes downstairs, feeling his way in the dark and easing along a step at a time until he gets to the basement door. There are not many people in the streets, and those that are go hurrying along because it is so cold, and none of them pay any attention to Rudolph or Johnny One Eye either. Well, finally, Rudolph stops a cop who's going along swinging his arms to keep warm and asks him if he knows where there's a pet shop. And it's really most indiscreet of such a guy as Rudolph to be interviewing cops. But the cop just points up the street and goes on without looking twice. And Rudolph laughs and pokes Johnny with a finger and says, No, Johnny. No, Johnny One Eye. The cop is not a dope for not recognizing Rudolph. Who can figure the hottest guy in 48 states to be going along a street with a little cat in his arms? And you, Johnny. Johnny says, Meow. And pretty soon Rudolph comes to the pet shop the cop points out. Are you a cat croaker? Rudolph says. Do you know what to do about a little cat that has a hurt eye? I am a kind of a vet, the guy says. Then take a glom at Johnny One Eye here and see what you can do for him, Rudolph says. Mister, he says, the best thing I can do for this cat is to put it out of its misery. You better let me give it something right now. It'll just go to sleep and never know what happens. No. No, I cannot bear to think of such a thing. What about some kind of an operation? I remember they take a bum lamp out of Joe the Goat at Bellevue one time, and he is okay now. Nothing will do your cat any good, the guy says. It is a goner. It'll start having fits pretty soon and die, sure. What is the idea of trying to save such a cat as this? It's just a cat. You can get 1 million like it for a nickel. No, Rudolph says. This is not a cat. This is Johnny One Eye. He's my only friend in the world. He's the only living thing that ever comes pushing up against me, warm and friendly, and trust me, in my whole life. I feel sorry for him. Your cat wants milk, the guy says. You can get some at the delicatessen store down at the corner. Mister, you look sick yourself. Can I do anything for you? But Rudolph only shakes his head and goes on out and down to the delicatessen joint where he buys a bottle of milk. And this transaction reminds him that he is very short in the mood department. In fact, he could find only a $5 note in his pockets, and he remembers that he has no way of getting any more, and when this runs out, which is a very sad predicament indeed for a guy who is accustomed to plenty of moo at all times. Then Rudolph returns to the old house and gives Johnny One Eye some of the milk in his derby hat, as he neglects buying something for Johnny to drink out of. But Johnny offers no complaints. He laps up the milk and curls himself into a wad in Rudolph's lap and purrs. Rudolph takes a swig of the milk himself, but it makes him sick. For by this time, Rudolph is really far from being in the pink of condition. He commences to worry that he may get too ill to continue looking for Butsy, as he can see that if it is not for Butsy, he'll not be in this situation, suffering the way he is, but on a long journey to someplace. It is along in the late afternoon of the day, following the night Rudolph goes out of the house, that he hears someone coming up the stairs. Where were we? It was along late in the afternoon that Rudolph hears somebody coming up the stairs. Well, naturally, he picks up his Betsy and gets ready for action, when he hears a very small voice calling, "Kitty, kitty, kitty," and he realizes that... And he realizes that the party that is coming upstairs can be nobody but a child. In fact, a minute later, a little pretty of maybe 6 years of age comes into the room all out of breath and says to Rudolph like this. "How do you do?" she says. "Have you seen my kitty?" Then she spots Johnny One-Eye in Rudolph's lap and runs over and sits down beside Rudolph and takes Johnny in her arms. And at first, Rudolph is inclined to resent this and has a notion to give her a good boffing. But he's too weak to exert himself in such a manner. "Who are you?" Rudolph says to the little pretty. "And where do you live? And how do you get into this house?" "Why," she says, "I am Elsie, and I live down the street, and I'm looking everywhere for my kitty for 3 days. And the door is open downstairs, and I know Kitty likes to go indoors that are open, so I came to find her, and here she is." "What is your name?" Elsie asks. "And why are you sitting on the floor in the cold? And where are all your chairs? Do you have any little girls like me, and do you love them dearly?" "No," Rudolph says. "By no means, and not at all." "Well," Elsie says, "I think you're a nice man for taking care of my kitty. Do you love Kitty?" "Look," Rudolph says, "his name is not Kitty. His name is Johnny One-Eye because he has only one eye." "I call her Kitty," Elsie says. "But Johnny One-Eye is a nice name too, and you can call her that if you like. I will call her Johnny, and I'll leave her with you to take care of always, and I'll come to see her every day. You see, if I take Johnny home, Butsy will only kick her again." "Butsy," Rudolph says. "Do I hear you say Butsy? Is his other name Fagin?" "Why, yes," Elsie says. "Do you know him?" "No," Rudolph says, "but I hear of him. What is he to you?" "He's my new daddy," Elsie says. "My other one and my best one is dead, and so my mama makes Butsy my new one. My mama says Butsy is her mistake. He's very mean. He kicks Johnny and hurts her and makes her run away. He kicks my mama too. Butsy kicks everybody and everything when he is mad. And he's always mad." "He is a louse to kick a little cat," Rudolph says. "Yes, that is what Mr. O'Toole says, but my mama says it's not a nice word, and I'm never to say it out loud." "Who is Mr. O'Toole?" Rudolph says. "He is the policeman. He lives across the street from us, and he's very nice to me. He says Butsy is the word you say just now for taking Mama's money when she brings it home from work. But my mama says someday Butsy is going far away, and then she'll buy me lots of things and send me to school and make me a lady." Then Elsie begins skipping around the room with Johnny One on her arms and singing, "I'm gonna be a lady, I'm going to be a lady," until Rudolph has to tell her to pipe down because he's afraid somebody may hear her. And all the time, Rudolph is thinking of Butsy and regretting that he's unable to get on his pins and go out of the house. "Well, now I must go home," Elsie says, "because this is the night Butsy comes in for his supper, and I have to be in bed before he gets there, so I will not bother him. Butsy does not like little girls. Butsy does not like little kittens. Butsy does not like little anythings. My mom is afraid of Butsy, and so am I. But I will leave Johnny here with you and come back tomorrow to see her." "Listen, Elsie, does Mr. O'Toole come home tonight to his house for his supper too?" "Oh, yes, he comes home every night. Sometimes when there's a night Butsy's not coming in for his supper, my mama lets me go over to Mr. O'Toole's, and I play with his dog Charlie. But you must never tell Butsy this because he does not like Mr. O'Toole either." Now, Rudolph takes an old letter out of his inside pocket and a pencil out of another pocket, and he scribbles a few lines on the envelope and stretches himself out on the floor and begins groaning, "Oh, oh, oh." And then he says to Elsie like this. "Look, Elsie, you're a smart little kid, and you pay strict attention to what I'm going to say to you. Do not go to bed tonight until Butsy gets in. Then you tell him you come in this old house looking for your cat, and that you hear somebody groaning like I do just now in the room at the head of the stairs. And that you find a guy who says his name is Rudolph, lying on the floor so sick he cannot move. Tell him the front door of the basement is open. But you must not tell him that Rudolph tells you to say these things. Do you understand?" "Oh, do you want him to come here?" He will kick Johnny again if he does. He will come here, but he will not kick Johnny. He will come here, or I am the worst guesser in the world. Tell him what I look like, Elsie. Maybe he will ask you if you see a gun. Tell him you do not see one. You do not see a gun. Do you, Elsie? No, only the one in your hand when I come in. But you put it under your coat. Well, you must not remember seeing my gun. It is a secret between you and me and Johnny One-Eye. Now, if Butsy leaves the house to come and see me, as I'm pretty sure he will, you run over to Mr. O'Toole's house and give him this note. But do not tell Butsy or your mama either about the note. If Butsy does not leave, it is my hard luck. But you give the note to Mr. O'Toole anyway. Now, tell me what you're to do, Elsie, so I can see if you have got everything correct. I am to go home and wait for Butsy. And I am to tell him Rudolph is lying on the floor of this dirty old house with a fat stomach and a big nose making noises, and that he is very sick, and the basement door is open, and there is no gun, if he asks me. And when Butsy comes to see you, I am to take this note to Mr. O'Toole. But Butsy and my ma are not to know I have the note. And if Butsy does not leave, I am to give it to Mr. O'Toole anyway, and you're to stay here and take care of Johnny, my kitten. Let us swell. Now you run along. So, Elsie leaves, and Rudolph sits up again against the wall. Afterwards, some of the neighbors claim they remember hearing a shot inside the house, followed by two more in quick succession, and then all is quiet until Officer O'Toole and half a dozen other cops come busting into the street with their guns out and their flashlights going. Kitty, 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 kitty. The first thing they find is Butsy at the foot of the stairs with two bullet wounds close together in his throat. And naturally, he is real dead. Rudolph is still sitting against the wall with what seems to be a small bundle of bloody fur in his lap, which turns out to be what is left of this little cat I'm telling you about. Although the cops are more interested in getting the come-alongs on Rudolph's wrist. But before they move him, he pulls his clothes aside and shows the doctor where the slug is in his side. And the doctor takes one glom on and shakes his head and says, "Gangrene. I think you have pneumonia, too, from the way you're blowing." I know this morning. Not much chance, eh, Croker? Not much, the doctor says. Well, cops, load me in. I do not suppose you want Johnny, seeing that he is dead. Johnny who? One of the cops says. Johnny One-Eye. This little cat here in my lap. Butsy shoots Johnny's only good eye out and takes most of his noodle with it. I never see a more wonderful shot. Well, Johnny is better off, but I feel sorry about him. He's my best friend down to the last. Then he begins to laugh. And the cop asks him what tickles him so much. And Rudolph says, "Oh, I'm thinking of the joke on Butsy. I'm positive he'll come looking for me all right, because he's greatly embarrassed by not tilting me over the first time, as of course he never knows he wings me. Well, I figured that with any kind of a square rattle, I'll have a better chance of nailing him than he has of nailing me. But that even if he happens to nail me, O'Toole will get my note in time to arrive here and nab Butsy on the spot with his gun on him. And I know it'll be a great pleasure to the DA to settle Butsy for having a gun on him. But as soon as I hear Butsy coming on the sneaksby up the stairs, I can see him taking all the worst of it. Because I'm now wheezing like a busted valve. You can hear me a block away, except when I hold my breath, which is very difficult indeed, considering the way I'm already greatly tuckered out. No, it does not look any good for me as Butsy keeps coming up the stairs. I'm in no shape to maneuver around the room. And pretty soon he'll be on the landing, and then all I'll have to do is wait there until he hears me, which he's bound to do unless I stop breathing altogether. Naturally, I do not care to risk a blast in the dark without knowing where he is, as something tells me Butsy is not a guy you can miss in safety. Well, I noticed several times before this that in the dark, Johnny One-Eye's good glim shines like a big spark. So when I feel Butsy is about to hit the landing, although of course I cannot see him, I flipped Johnny's ball of paper across the room to the wall just opposite the door. And tough as he must be feeling, Johnny chases after it when he hears it light. I figure Butsy will hear Johnny playing with the paper and see his eyes shining and think it's me, and take a pop at it, and that his gun flash will give me a crack at him. It all works out like I dope it. But I never give Butsy credit for being such a marksman as to be able to hit a cat's eye in the dark. If I know this, maybe I'll never stick Johnny out in the front the way I do. It is a good thing I never give Butsy a second shot. Still, it is a good lesson to him for kicking a little cat. Then they take Rudolph to a hospital. And this is where I see him and piece out this story of Johnny One-Eye. An officer OToole is at Rudolph's bedside keeping guard over him. And I remember that not long before Rudolph chalks out, he looks at OToole and says to him like this: "Copper, there's no chance of them out juggling the kid on the reward move, is there?" "No," OToole says. "No chance. I keep the note you send me by Elsie saying she will tell me where you are. It is information leading to your capture, just as the reward offer states. Rudolph, it is a nice thing you do for Elsie and her mother, although it is not nearly as nice as icing Butsy for them. By the way, Copper, there's the remainders of a pound note in my pants pocket when I'm brought here. I want you to do me a favor. Get it from the desk and buy Elsie another cat. And name it Johnny, will you?" "Sure," OToole says. "Anything else?" "Yes," Rudolph says. "Be sure it has 2 good eyes."
And next week at 11:45, Mike